Your novel could use a good villain. Well, technically a bad villain, but you know what I mean. And if the villain you've written displays any of the 5 signs we're talking about today, it could be that they are a bad, good villain. Or not a good villain. That was kind of a bad, good sentence. Today, we're talking about 5 signs that you've written a bad villain and not in a good way. All right, sign number 1 that you've written a bad villain, your hero isn't working. You can write a really good hero, but if the audience isn't rooting for them, if your reader doesn't want them to succeed, if they don't care about the character, if they complain that your hero is a blowhard, the problem might not lie with your hero, but rather with your villain. If your villain is hateable and heinous enough, then the audience can get behind almost anybody who is opposing them. This obviously doesn't excuse the need to write a good hero, and if your hero character is poorly written, it probably doesn't matter what villain they go up against, but this is a consideration. It's like if you want to be successful in politics, don't talk about how good you are, talk about how bad the other guy is. People have a negativity bias. We'd rather see a problem dealt with than hear about a solution to a problem we don't have. Your reader is going to be way more concerned about having your villain be defeated than they are about who is defeating that villain, provided they want the villain to be defeated enough. Any hero, even one that is incredibly well written, will fall flat if the villain they go up against isn't hateable or heinous or evil enough. Problems with your hero, if readers aren't connecting with your hero, it might actually be a sign of problems with your villain. All right, sign number 2, you've written a bad villain, they don't have an advantage. People naturally tend to root for the underdog. Better stories come out of characters who beat the odds rather than characters who just have an advantage in the odds. It's the reason that the heroes are usually the rebels, that the villain often has more power or more status or more wealth than your plucky protagonist. It's why the bad guys should start on the high ground. Even something like age can apply here. Have you noticed that most villains tend to be older than the heroes they go up against? The villain is usually a few grades ahead. The villain usually has gray hair while the hero is a young person. The villain might be an evil empire that's ruled forever while your heroes are this ragtag group of rebels who just got together in chapter 1. The villain is usually either older or just kind of assumed to be the same age as the hero. I'm sure there's examples where this isn't the case, but I couldn't readily think of any. Anyway, a villain that has a distinct advantage makes a story more interesting. It makes the stakes higher for the hero, it makes the heroes work harder, it makes them face longer odds to be successful, and all of this will make the reader more sympathetic to the hero, and it will also make your villain more interesting because they seem to have the advantage. Whether it's a financial, power, status, or even just experience advantage, making sure that your villain has an advantage over your heroes is definitely advantageous. Sign number 3 of a bad villain, their villainy is not displayed early in the story. You can have a great villain, but if the reader doesn't recognize or think of them as a villain, or you haven't given them any reason to think of this person as a villain, then that's a problem. This is a very tactical level thing, but you should strive to have a very clear demonstration of your villain's nature as early in your story as possible. Have them slaughter some innocent villagers, or drive a bus full of puppies off a bridge, or leave nasty YouTube comments somewhere early in the story. The idea here is pretty straightforward. You just need to give the reader some sign that this character is actually a villain. If you don't do that, how are they going to know? Even if you want a villain to be a bit more mysterious, there still needs to be some kind of sign to the reader that this character is a villain. This might be other characters talking about the villain, or some sign in the world of the villain's previous villainy exploits. That's harder to pull off than just having the villain drink a puppy-flavored smoothie for breakfast, but it can work in certain situations. The villain's reputation can serve the same role as a scene where they're doing something heinous and villainous. A villain that doesn't work could be because you haven't created the proper feeling around that villain character, either directly through the scenes that the villain is in, or in the way that the villain is talked about by the other characters in your story. What you don't want is the reader asking, why the hell are the characters trying to defeat this guy? The reader needs reasons, they need evidence, they need something beyond just the villain being the person that the hero needs to defeat. Sign number 4 of a lackluster villain: they don't foil off of your hero. I'm a big fan of foil. It makes a great hat, and there's nothing better for keeping the banana bread from browning too much when it's getting baked. And the relationship between your hero and your villain should also contain some foil. Pairing a hero with a villain that's heinous enough to be worth defeating is one thing, but there's more that needs to be done most of the time. I think the best hero-villain pairings have some kind of foiling dynamic, some feature of the hero or villain that is emphasized by the other character. This is the light side versus dark side. This is freedom versus authoritarianism. This is water versus fire. A villain that emphasizes a hero's flaws can be very effective. Maybe your hero is not super great with the word-saying stuff, but the villain is ultra charismatic. Maybe your hero is hot-headed and impulsive, but the villain is calculating and patient. Maybe your hero can never make a banana bread that isn't burnt on the outside and doughy on the inside, but your villain's loaves are always just pure golden brown every time and super moist, and I still don't understand how the hell he does that. We're not inviting you to the next bake sale, Darren. And lastly, sign number 5 of a potentially bad villain: the villain is in a story that doesn't need a villain. If you've been writing a comment this whole video about the difference between a villain and an antagonist, then prepare to be antagonized, because I'm about to disrupt the point that you were about to make. A villain is just a subset of the broader category of antagonists. Antagonists being anything or anyone that opposes your protagonist. Antagonists are the forces driving the conflict in your story, of which a villain is just one flavor. A particularly evil flavor like mint chocolate or black licorice, but they're just one type of antagonist. Cramming a villain into a story that doesn't need a villain, trying to make an antagonist evil when really all they need to be is just an opposing force, can actually be detrimental. Think about whether your story actually needs a villain. This is going to change how you approach all the other characters. It will change how you set up motivations. It will change what is driving the reader to care about the conflict. In stories with a protagonist-antagonist dynamic versus a hero-villain dynamic, it's not the evilness of the antagonist that drives the reader rooting for the hero or the protagonist. It's just generally that the antagonist is less likable than the protagonist, usually. Non-villainy antagonists often force the reader to make a less black and white decision about whether to root for the protagonist. As I mentioned, it tends to be more of a less likability rather than an evilness thing. If the competing love interest is just also a nice guy, then why would we want our main character to succeed? Maybe he's just less likable than our protagonist in some way. If the murder was actually kind of justified, then do we really want the detective to solve the case? In this type of story, the conflict would be more around the limits of the detective's oath to uphold law and justice in certain situations where maybe those rules don't apply in a black and white way. If Darren's banana bread is going to sell better at the next bake sale, then is sabotaging his oven really justified? Maybe. Removing the villain element from your antagonist automatically makes a story a little more gray, a little more subjective. The decision the reader makes about who to root for becomes a little more nuanced. This isn't better for every story, but for certain stories it is. So give some consideration to whether your novel actually needs a villain, because it might not. Speaking of things that might not be a thing anymore, this video is definitely not going to be a thing anymore because we've reached the end of it and I'm going to stop talking now. Please let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching and I will see you next time.